Most of us live with a hidden force shaping our decisions, reactions, and emotional patterns, and we don't even realize it. That force is the shadow, the repressed, denied, or unloved parts of ourselves we've buried to survive, to fit in or to feel acceptable. But what we push into the unconscious doesn't disappear, it gains power. The more you avoid your shadow, the more it controls you from behind the scenes, silently dictating your behavior, relationships, and sense of worth. It shows up in self-sabotage, emotional triggers, and the patterns you swear you'll never repeat. Facing the shadow isn't easy, but it's the most courageous work you'll ever do, because within the shadow lies not only your pain, but also your potential. Integration leads to liberation. The shadow isn't evil by nature, it's simply the part of you that was rejected, shamed, or deemed unacceptable at some point in your development. When you were a child, you absorbed messages about what traits were allowed and what traits would cause you to be punished, ignored, or abandoned. So you split yourself. You showed the world your acceptable self and banished everything else into hiding. The problem is, those parts never disappeared, they became the shadow. And that shadow is not a villain, it's a wounded child carrying pain, unmet needs, and buried energy. It's anger you were never allowed to express. It's sadness that was called weakness. It's your power that frightened others. And because it was never accepted, it became distorted. Labeling the shadow as evil only reinforces the problem. It keeps you in the same loop of fear and suppression. But when you start seeing the shadow as a result of rejection, not an innate flaw, you soften. You begin to understand that these hidden parts are not working against you. They're begging for reintegration. The shadow acts out only because it's been abandoned. Like a child throwing a tantrum, it demands attention in the only way it knows how, through self-sabotage, emotional outbursts, or compulsions. And the more you avoid it, the more power it gains. This is why some of your behavior feels out of control, because a disowned part of you is trying to speak. That irrational jealousy, that impulsive anger, that desire to control or escape, they're not random, they're the language of the shadow. And behind them is a deeper story, often rooted in moments where you were made to feel ashamed of your authentic responses to life. Instead of being guided through your emotions with compassion, you were trained to reject them. But what you reject becomes the shadow, and what becomes shadow becomes unconscious. And the unconscious, as Jung warned, directs your life until you make it conscious. The shadow becomes especially powerful because it contains energy, huge energy. Every part of you that was rejected didn't just vanish, it stayed alive inside you, frozen in time. And that's why shadow work isn't about erasing anything, it's about thawing out those frozen parts and allowing them to reintegrate. When you reclaim what you once rejected, you reclaim your life force. You stop leaking energy through shame, through fear, through emotional avoidance. You move from fragmentation to wholeness. The key shift here is this: the shadow isn't bad, it's buried. It's made of everything you were taught to suppress to stay safe or loved. So healing doesn't begin with fighting the shadow. It begins with recognizing it was never the enemy. It was the exiled part of you that absorbed the pain you couldn't handle at the time. And now it's waiting for you to see it, not with judgment, but with compassion. Once you do, everything begins to change. You stop being controlled by reactive patterns. You no longer project your pain onto others. You begin to relate to yourself with more curiosity and less criticism. You realize that your shadow holds some of your greatest gifts: creativity, authenticity, boundaries, strength, but you've been trained to view those gifts as dangerous. The irony is, the most alive parts of you were often the first to be shut down, and reclaiming them is the real journey to self-mastery. So if you're struggling with inner chaos, destructive cycles, or emotional patterns that don't make sense, look for what you've rejected. Look for the parts of yourself you were told were too much, too sensitive, too angry, or too selfish. That's where your shadow lives, and that's where your healing starts. The shadow isn't evil, it's your abandoned self crying out for reunion. And once you stop running from it, you'll find it doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to rejoin you. Because wholeness doesn't come from cutting yourself into acceptable pieces, it comes from becoming brave enough to love what was once unloved. Every judgment you make about others is a flashlight pointing to a buried part of yourself. When you feel intense irritation, anger, or disgust at someone else's behavior, it's rarely just about them. It's about something in you that hasn't been faced, something you've suppressed, disowned, or found unacceptable in yourself. This is the mechanism Carl Jung called projection. The psyche can't tolerate holding certain traits consciously, so it projects them onto others like a movie screen. You end up seeing your own shadow not in the mirror, but in the people who trigger you most. For example, if someone's arrogance enrages you, it might be because you were taught that expressing confidence makes you selfish or bad. So you buried your own healthy pride, and now feel disgust when others display it. Or maybe you judge someone for being emotionally needy because you were shamed for your own vulnerability growing up. The truth is, what we attack in others is often what we've denied in ourselves. Judgments become defense mechanisms that protect you from parts of your inner world that you haven't yet made peace with. This doesn't mean every judgment is wrong or unjustified. It means the emotional intensity behind your reactions reveals a deeper wound. It's not just disapproval, it's personal. It touches a nerve, and that nerve leads back to you. The reason projection is so powerful is because it lets you see the contents of your unconscious mind. If you're willing to look honestly, your biggest triggers are like arrows pointing to unhealed parts of yourself. What bothers you about others reveals what's still unresolved within. This is uncomfortable because it challenges your ego. The ego wants to feel righteous and superior. It wants to say they're the problem, not me. But growth begins the moment you stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, why does this affect me so deeply? That's when you begin to reclaim your projections. You take back ownership of the qualities you've split off. You stop outsourcing your discomfort and start investigating your inner landscape. This process is not about excusing bad behavior. It's about becoming conscious. When you reclaim your projections, you become less reactive. You stop being ruled by emotional landmines. You become free. Because the more you integrate your buried traits, the less power they have over you. That needy part of you, it might need love. That jealous part, it might need validation. That aggressive part, it might be the assertiveness you've been too scared to express. All these traits are human, but when you exile them into the shadow, they distort. They start showing up through judgment, sabotage, or emotional overreactions. Judgment also distances you from others. It creates separation. It blocks empathy. But when you recognize that what you judge is also within you, it softens you. You become more humble, more open. You realize we're all made of light and shadow, and that most people are acting from pain just like you. The same parts you resent in others might be parts you haven't learned how to hold gently in yourself. There's incredible power in turning your judgments inward, not as self-blame, but as a tool for self-understanding. The next time you feel that wave of disgust, rage, or superiority, pause, ask yourself, what part of me have I buried that this person is reflecting back to me? That question can open a door to profound healing. It's not easy. It requires brutal honesty and self-compassion. But every time you answer it, you recover a part of yourself. You become more whole. And here's the deeper truth. What you judge in others is not just what you've buried. It's often what you're afraid to become. You fear being weak, so you judge weakness. You fear being selfish, so you hate it in others. You fear your own ambition, so you mock those who chase success. But if you turn toward that fear with curiosity, you'll find parts of yourself you were never allowed to explore, and in reclaiming them, you expand. So don't run from judgment. Track it. Follow it. Let it guide you to what needs attention within. Because every judgment is a shadow messenger in disguise, and when you finally listen, you'll discover the very qualities you've rejected may be the ones that make you whole. When you avoid your shadow, you don't actually escape it, you become trapped by it. The parts of yourself that you reject, suppress, or deny don't disappear. They go underground. And from that hidden place they begin to control you in ways you don't even realize. You find yourself repeating patterns, getting into the same toxic relationships, reacting the same way in conflict, sabotaging your growth over and over again. These aren't random events. They are psychological loops, and they are symptoms of a shadow that has not been faced. The shadow is not inherently evil. It's made up of the feelings, impulses, and traits you were told were unacceptable. Maybe you were taught not to cry, so now your sadness comes out as numbness or rage. Maybe you were punished for being assertive, so now your ambition turns into envy when others succeed. You keep replaying these cycles not because you're weak, but because your psyche is trying to bring attention to what has been left behind. The loop is a message. Look here. Something needs to be healed. Avoidance doesn't mean peace. It means delay. You suppress anger, and it builds pressure. You ignore insecurity, and it drives your decisions from the background. You numb sadness, and it shows up as apathy. The shadow doesn't go away just because you pretend it isn't there. In fact, the more you suppress it, the more chaotic it becomes. And until you consciously face it, you'll keep living on autopilot, mistaking your defense mechanisms for your personality. Think about it. How many times have you said, "Why does this keep happening to me?" That's your shadow speaking. The loop repeats until the lesson is learned. Every time you avoid the discomfort of looking inward, you strengthen the cycle. You strengthen the mask. You become more reactive and less intentional. You start living a life that's about maintaining control, not experiencing wholeness. Avoiding your shadow also keeps you fragmented. You split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. You try to be only good, kind, successful, humble, but you forget that you are also angry, selfish, jealous, needy. To be fully human is to hold both. Denying your darker emotions doesn't make you virtuous, it makes you incomplete, and that incompleteness creates anxiety, depression, and a constant sense that something is missing. Ironically, the more you avoid the shadow, the more power it has over you. It leaks out in sarcasm, passive aggression, resentment, perfectionism. It distorts your relationships. You project your disowned parts onto others and judge them harshly without realizing you're really judging yourself, and you keep getting stuck in the same loops because the lesson you refuse to learn will keep showing up in different faces with different names until you finally face it. Facing the shadow doesn't mean indulging it. It means acknowledging it. It means saying, yes, this is part of me too. When you name it, you take away its unconscious power. You stop being triggered so easily. You begin to understand your reactions. You become less controlled by fear, shame, and guilt. And slowly the loop begins to break. Breaking the loop is not about fixing yourself, it's about integrating what you've pushed away. That moment when you sit with your jealousy instead of projecting it, when you admit your fear instead of masking it with control, when you face your shame and offer it compassion instead of hiding it, that's when the loop starts to loosen. That's when your growth begins. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the heart of the shadow loop. If you don't face what's hidden, it will shape your life without your permission. You'll think life is just happening to you, but in truth, your shadow is orchestrating the same play, again and again, waiting for you to wake up. So if you feel stuck, if you keep living the same story with different characters, if you're tired of the emotional weight that never seems to lift, maybe it's not because you're broken, maybe it's because something inside you is waiting to be seen. The loop isn't your enemy, it's your mirror, it's your invitation to face the truth and find freedom on the other side. The only way out of the loop is through it, and that begins by turning toward the shadow with honesty and courage, not to fix it, not to judge it, but to finally understand it. The parts of you that you've spent your life running from, the rage, the fear, the shame, the envy, are not enemies. They only look like monsters because they've been abandoned in the dark. But when you turn toward them with presence and curiosity instead of resistance, something extraordinary happens. They stop attacking you and start guiding you. Integration is not about erasing your darkness. It's about giving it a voice, a role, and a place within your inner world. And in doing so, what once felt like a threat becomes a source of insight, clarity, and even wisdom. The monster was never your shadow. It was your silence, your shame, your fear of being too much or not enough. The very traits that overwhelmed you as a child became internal exiles. You banished them to survive. But now as an adult, what you need is not more control, it's more compassion. Integration doesn't mean you act on every dark impulse. It means you acknowledge its presence, understand its purpose, and let it show you where your boundaries, values, and needs are being violated. Your anger, when integrated, becomes a guide towards self-respect and boundaries. Your sadness becomes a doorway to empathy and healing. Even your jealousy, once understood, becomes a signal that something in you desires more aliveness, connection, or recognition. What you once called weakness is often an unrecognized strength, waiting to be reimagined. The monster only lashes out when it's ignored, suppressed, or judged. But the moment you listen, it becomes your inner teacher. This is the work Jung pointed to when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You don't grow by rejecting your inner darkness. You grow by walking into it and discovering it's not a monster at all. It's a wounded child, a protector, a forgotten part of your power that got buried under the rubble of early pain. Integration is about rescuing those parts and bringing them into the light, not to make them pretty but to make them whole. When you integrate, you stop battling yourself. The war inside you settles. You begin to notice the anxiety was trying to protect you from failure. The control was guarding against rejection. The detachment was shielding you from heartbreak. These weren't dysfunctions. They were strategies created by a younger version of you doing the best they could. Integration honors that. It says, "Thank you, I see why you are here, but I don't need to be ruled by you anymore." This is where inner peace begins, not in perfection, but in wholeness. You can hold grief and joy in the same breath. You can allow fear to sit beside courage. You stop needing to be one thing. You start allowing all things. That's not chaos, it's depth. And with that depth comes a grounded strength. You stop reacting from the wound and start responding.